hard. So there's two groups in this. So it accounts for two questions on the exam.
Okay.
So we'll start with station setup and kind of the equipment you need to create a station. And obviously, you need a transceiver. It could be just a handy talkie, or it could be a base station. Most base stations need a separate power supply. Back in the old days of the big tube type, they had a built-in power supply and you could plug them into the AC wall socket. But all the modern ones are set so they could actually be mobile and run off of 12 volts. So you need a separate 12-volt power supply for it. If you want to do any of the digital modes, like FT8 and moon bounce and those kinds of things, you'll also need a computer. There's possibly a few radios that have that capability built in, but most of them require an external computer. And usually a little more than a cell phone. If you're doing voice operations, obviously you need a microphone and a speaker, and you need the necessary cables to hook it up. Depending on the radio, if it's a newer one, you usually only need a USB cable to connect it up to the computer. If it was an older one, you would need audio cables to hook up the microphone and the speaker to your radio. And there's even little adapter boxes called a rig blaster is one of them, where if you have a radio that doesn't have a built-in sound card, so you can't go direct with USB, it's a little adapter box that's USB back to your computer, and it converts it into the microphone and speaker connections you need on the radio. You also need to consider grounding. You need to have a good ground to your radio. Even if it's a mobile radio, it's especially important that it's got a good ground in the car. And of course, you need an antenna. Now, if you got a handy talkie, it's attached, but otherwise you need an external antenna and feed line like we talked about to get to it. So when we say a transceiver, all we're talking about is a transmitter and receiver in the same box. Years ago, they could be separate items, where you could have a separate transmitter and a separate receiver. They don't really build them that way anymore. One of the typical, or most popular, I guess, starter radios is the ICOM 7300. It's a 100-watt radio, and it does all of the HF bands. It has a 100-watt output, which is good enough for most purposes. And it takes about an 18 to 20 amp power supply to run it. So you need to consider how far away the power supply is. So you have at least heavy gauge wire so you don't get a lot of voltage drop due to the current drop.
Right.
When we talk about 12-volt batteries and 12-volt supplies, the radios are really set up to run on 13.8 volts, which tends to be the nominal voltage for a fully charged 12-volt battery. When, like an automobile battery or one of the lithium iron phosphate, the newer ones, when they get down to about 12 volts, then it can actually damage the battery. And a low voltage into your radio, when you get down in the 12-volt range, can actually cause some spurious sidebands in the transmission. So you need to make sure that you got a decent power supply and heavy gauge wire to feed it, good connections. Like I mentioned, that most of the power supplies are going to be 13.8 volts. Typically, they're fixed. In some cases, they might have a little adjustment where you can vary it a volt or two. When you look for power supply, you have to remember that most of the transceivers are only about 50% efficient, which means if it's a 100-watt transceiver, it's going to take at least 200 watts from the power supply to run it, and usually a little more than that. So you have to factor that in when you select a power supply. Like I said, the 7300, which is fairly typical, draws up to 20 amps when it's outputting 100 watts. So if you multiply that out, 20 amps times 13.8 volts, you're about 260 watts or 70 watts. So that's the formula there, is to figure out the minimum current you need by doing 2 times the power out divided by the nominal supply voltage, which would typically be 13.8. So in this case, we said we got a 50-watt radio, so we multiply by 2 and divide it by 13.8. It says we need at least a 7.2 amp power supply for that to be able to output 50 watts. So why are short, heavy gauge wires used for a transceiver's power connection?
Alpha.
Which of the following is an appropriate power supply rating for a typical 50-watt output mobile FM transceiver?
Much.
Delta.
Yep. Delta.
Okay. And they put 50 watts because that's fairly typical of a mobile radio. Okay, so when we talk about you need a computer to do the digital modes, like any of the WS, JTX programs, it provides 3 things. One is the received audio, the transmit audio, and the transmitter keying signal. In other words, to switch it between transmit and receive. When you connect it up with a USB cable, those become virtual channels. So it makes life very easy. You just plug in your USB cable and you go to the computer and you select the correct USB port that you're using for that radio. And usually that means you got to go to the device manager and figure out which is the correct one. And then you select that in the program and everything is pretty cool. If you're actually using the audio cables, then you need to make sure that you'll have separate cables, usually with RCA type connectors, or the little 1/8" phone type connectors.
Oh, yeah.
You need to make sure that you connect the speaker out of the transceiver to the line in input on the computer, and the microphone in on the transceiver to the speaker out on the computer. So you always want to go output to input. So the transceiver sends the signal, receive signal back to the computer, and the computer sends the audio that you're going to transmit back to the radio. It's kind of a simple setup of, this is a little single board transceiver. I believe this can come as a kit. You can actually build it.
Wow.
And it's showing how you'd hook it up to a laptop, and it's using the audio phone jacks. So you just provide an antenna, a power supply, and 2 cables, and you're off and running. I don't see a microphone on this one or a jack for it. And I don't see a
So it
key.
just uses a computer microphone?
Oh, well, excuse me. We're talking about digital mode, so there is no key or microphone necessary. Yeah. The computer is going to generate the audio frequency shift keying signals. And what you see on the screen is a display for running FT8, although you can't quite read it. So when you're running something like FT8, it's really the computer doing all the encoding and decoding. You just kind of pick what station you want to try to make contact with. And it runs kind of automatically from that point. So what signals are used in a computer radio interface for digital mode operation?
Charlie.
Say what?
Charlie?
Yeah.
Very good. Power transceiver audio input and output connected in a station configured to operate using FT8.
Bravo. Bravo.
Sounds good to me. Which of the following connections is made between a computer and a transceiver to use computer software when operating digital modes? Well, remember, there's always
I'm
two
confused on that one.
throw away.
Say again?
There's always
Delta.
two that you easily throw away.
What the heck? Delta. I don't know. Nope.
In other words, in to out or out to in, depending on which way you want to look at it.
Oh, that's good to know. Mhm.
Say that again?
It's always output to input or input to output.
Right.
Can you go back to the slide that shows the little computer?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be too bad. Oh, it doesn't really show us that, does it?
Well, it's got audio in and out, but
Sort of. Oh, yeah.
But if you look at the arrow,
uh-huh.
it's the
Yeah.
audio out or the speaker out on the laptop going to the audio in on the computer, on the radio board.
It's rather subtle. It's subtle.
So it's always
Okay.
in the direction of output to input, output to input. Okay?
So always output to input. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's output to the computer is input to the transceiver.
Right. Well, it's just like if you wanted to hook up earphones to your laptop, if you plug it into the microphone jack, it's not going to work. You need to plug it into the headphone or speaker jack.
Right. Okay.
But that's not as subtle. I mean, just saying. I mean, if it says headphones, you plug it into headphones. It's good.
Yeah. But it's not always labeled headphones. Sometimes it could be line
Audio
out.
in. Yep.
I just
Yep.
say line in or out. Line
Yeah.
out.
Once we said this, it makes sense and I can relate, but not at first.
Oh, okay. We talked about you need some cables. Okay, either audio cables or a USB cable. If you're doing voice, you need a microphone. You need power supply cables. We talked about those need to be fairly heavy gauge depending on the amount of current. So all of those cables are conductors and they're susceptible to stray RF fields. So, and it could be from your transmitter itself, kind of creating some, in essence, feedback, which
Well,
can cause distorted audio.
when you do the power supply, isn't it better insulated? You're talking about the heavy one, kind of like most of them are like orange or yellow, and you use them for like yard decorations and stuff, and the Halloween and stuff. You talk about those kind of heavy power supply cables.
Uh, no, just something in the probably um, 12 gauge or 10 gauge wire.
Okay.
Um, so all of those cables you're using can pick up stray RF, and one of the things you can do to reduce it is the use of ferrite chokes. Now, a lot of these cables you can buy, have them built in. If you've seen USB cables that has a little lump on each end before the connector,
Yeah.
that's a ferrite choke that's already there.
Oh.
If you have cables that don't have them, you can buy these chokes that are clip-on. It's actually split, and you can clamp it on there and connect it. So you really can't have too many ferrite chokes. You should
Okay.
have one at the end of each cable.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You can have more than one. Yeah. Every one that you add increases the amount of impedance that's for current that's traveling on the surface of the cable, of the conductor.
So what does a ferrite choke look like?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Perfect.
These are split ones. It's in a little plastic housing, so you clamp it on there and it snaps together.
I've seen them for like cameras to go from like the computer to the camera. So,
oh yeah, any kind of cable where you may have RF signals running around, you should use them. You can get a box of assorted sizes off of Amazon fairly cheap. It's like a 20 or 25 in a box of various sizes. Even though they come from China, they're not the best, but they work.
Right.
Which of the following could you use to cure distorted audio caused by RF current on the shield of a microphone cable?
Delta.
Delta.
Okay, we talked a little about grounding. It also helps to avoid interference. And when you ground equipment, especially like in a base station, where you may have a lot of items, you might have an SWR meter, you might have a separate tuner, might have a separate speaker, the power supply is separate, other potential things. You can usually, in most cases, they'll all have a ground lug on them. So you can connect them to a ground, and you want to make that a single point ground. In other words, like a star, you connect everything to a common point. A typical setup, people might take a piece of copper pipe and mount it to the wall in their base station, and connect everything to that little piece of copper pipe. That makes it a single point ground. And then you connect that piece of copper pipe to an outside ground close to the station.
Yeah.
You could also have a copper plate or a copper bar, do the same kind of thing. Internally, you can make those connections with flat copper strap or braid. Braid's a lot easier to use. On the outside, you don't want to use the braid because of the water intrusion in it. So you really want to try to use either copper strap or heavy gauge wire. I have where everything comes through the window, I have a big copper plate that everything is mounted to, and that's connected to a ground rod, and actually it's connected to a bunch of ground rods, and it's a 2-inch wide copper strap. And copper's not cheap nowadays. That's the problem.
I have seen grounding wire that is bare, and I've seen it covered.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't
matter. It doesn't matter. Okay.
If it's got a covering on it, and it's usually green,
yes.
it keeps it from tarnishing and getting that nice kind of blackish green patina.
Right.
But it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
There's some copper strap on the left and braid on the right.
We use that on our rigs, the braid.
Yeah.
We had a general who would come around and check our grounding, and what he'd do is he'd grab that, and he'd try to lift himself up off of the, to make sure it was properly grounded. So that's okay. I fixed them. I got silicone grease that you couldn't see, and we put a real light coating on it so that yeah. He slid once, and the second time he tried to pull the grounding rod out of the ground because they're out in the middle of an airport field, and it is sopping wet. Everywhere you go, it squishes. It's like, of course, you could just pull it right out of the ground. But when he got a hold of that silicone grease on that one too, he left us alone after that.
Yeah, that's one nice thing around here. I can push an 8-foot ground rod at least halfway down just by hand.
Yeah, exactly.
So which of the following conductors is preferred for bonding at RF?
I would say Delta.
Bonding. Wait, did we talk about bonding?
I would say the flat copper strap, Delta.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. You don't want to do the copper braid off of a coaxial cable. Uh, it's not really intended for people do that, but it's not a heavy braid like what we showed in the
Yeah.
picture. Um, and in a lot of cases, it's not tinned either. It's just spare copper. Okay, so we talked about power supplies and the need for using heavy gauge wire that's at least rated for the amount of current that you need, and how to figure out the minimum current you need because of the efficiency of the radios. And the kind of cabling that you need when you're doing the digital modes between your computer and your radio. Using ferrite beads wherever you can, and have a single point ground and connect everything. And the reason you connect everything is if you do have RF, and you don't have things connected together in a single point ground, you can have a difference in potential between the different pieces of equipment. Like the cases are usually metal, so you can wind up getting an RF burn, which I haven't experienced yet, but I understand they're very painful. It's not like a normal burn.
So can I ask a question here? So we're talking about grounding and then it talks about bonding. Are those terms interchangeable or are we different
Well,
things?
grounding is the connection to some sort of ground. Bonding is the connection itself.
So like
And
when you like oh, what do you want to call it? When you actually screw in the grounding to the device where it actually contacts it. Okay.
right,
That's the bonding. Okay,
right. You want to
thank
make
you.
sure, well, especially in a car, if you're doing a mobile radio and you need to ground it to the chassis somewhere, so you need to find, like most people will probably put the radio, like mine, under the driver's seat. So you need to find a bolt close by that you can connect to. And usually they're painted, so you have to, kind of
Yeah.
fire brush that to get bare metal, make a good bonding. When they also, if you're talking about ground rods outside, with a clamp, people that are really serious about it will use, they have these little packs. It's basically thermite, and you put it on the connection and light it, and it actually welds the two pieces together.
Mhm.
And when you are bonding, you need to make sure that you're doing physical type clamping connections, no solder. Because for lightning protection, if you did have a lightning strike close by, you'll have a few thousand amps running through those wires, and if it's a solder connection, the solder would vaporize instantly, and you no longer have a. So it needs to be a good physical, either welded or a screw type clamps. Where did my cord go?